Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Resinator's Conquest podcast. This is the start of our Out of Combat action series. We're going to go over each one individually. I'll show you the rules on each of the actions and how to perform them, and then give a little bit of advice or feedback on my experience using those actions so far in the game. Alright, let's move right on to the first Out of Combat action you can perform would be to march. Again, this is always the one that you can do twice. I'm going to show you a couple examples of doing marches, wielding marches forward, sideways, backwards, as well as showing you how to wield and how to maneuver around an impassable object. Then I'll show some examples of how to march on the field from reinforcements, as well as passing through other friendly regiments and some restrictions in the march action. Alright, let's get on into it.
Taking a move action is pretty simple. Let's use the Mori as an example. Checking their regiment profile, you will see that the Mori have 6, which means they will be able to move 6 inches in a move action. If the Mori were to march 6 inches forward, just place your measuring tool at the beginning of the regiment and move them forward 6 inches. If you would like to move the regiment either left, right, or backwards, it's at half the marching distance. So in this case, it would be 3. Now let's talk about how to wield, or turn.
So you have to choose one of these 2 points as a pivot point, and then wield it either one way or the other. Okay? And so let's try to wield this side first, and we'll choose this as a pivot point. So the side you're going to move, the opposite side of the pivot point, you're going to put your tape measure down, and then what you're going to do is pinch your stands together and slowly turn them and rotate them, and then that would be like a 2-inch wield, or maybe a 3-inch wield, you know, and you can even do a 1-inch wield. So if we're gonna do it the other way, you put the tape measure on that side, okay, and then you can do a 1, 2, or 3-inch wield, even farther if you want, like 4, 5, 6 inches. That's a whole 6-inch wield for a whole march. Okay, so then let's say you had to get by an obstacle. Let's find an obstacle. Now in this scenario, we have a piece of terrain that we're going to have to march around, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Alright, so as you can see, you can't march forward because this guy will be running into the terrain here. So we're going to wield around it and do a double march. So we're going to wield first, so we can put the tape measure down, and we're going to wield a few inches first. So we're going to wield 3 inches first. That's going to make us be able to clear the terrain here. Then we're going to move 3 inches forward. Now for our second march action, we're going to wield back so that we can continue going forward. So it'd be 1, 2, 3 inches again, and then we can move 3 inches forward for a total of 6 inches. And that's how you would maneuver around a piece of terrain. Alright, now we're going to show you an example of marching onto the battlefield, and this is something I see people get wrong a lot, especially for new players. So it's pretty simple. What you're going to do is line up your regiment right onto the edge of your table. Hopefully if you have a playmat, that does make it easier, especially if there's an overhang like there is here right now. But if there's not, just move the regiments on as if this was the case. So you would line them up right at the edge of your mat or your battlefield. You can move up the 6 inches. And that's how they come on the battlefield. This is the way you don't do it, is not like this and then move on up 6 inches. That's not the way to do it. They have to start off the battlefield and then they come on from 6 inches, and that's as far as they can go. So let's say they move up 3 inches first, right? Because these stands are a little less than 3 inches. So if they move up 3 inches first to get on the battlefield, then you can start doing a wield and do like a 3-inch wield, and turn them the direction you want to go. So that's also something you can do as they come in and from reinforcements. Let's say you have a situation like this where you have your Mori behind your Praetorian Guard, and you want to march through them. That's okay, you can do that. So the easiest way to do it is just kind of put your tape measure down, see how far you would be, and then kind of move them around. So they'd reach that 6-inch mark. Now we have this scenario here where the Mori couldn't make a single march to get past the Praetorian Guard. They'd have to make a double march to get past it. And in that case, you could do it. Just take your 2 marches, and then you would march past them, and again, just move around them. There are some restrictions to this rule. Now let's just say that you had... Now, the Praetorian Guard are engaged with the 100 Kingdoms Steel Legion. In this case, you wouldn't be able to march through this at all, even if a double march would clear them. This is a first blood scenario where we're gonna march. I think there's 2 ways of doing the march. The way they say in the book, so you can just move your leader first. They say I just want to move him up 5 inches, so I moved him up 5 inches. And then I move everyone else their distance, and measure each one 5 inches, and make sure that they're still within the command range of your leader. That's one way of doing it. But if you kind of have a formation like I did right here, okay, where it's pretty much, you know where each person is, if you just move up the leader once, right, then move all the other guys to the same space distance around him. That's the way I like to do it. It just makes it easier, quicker and easier. If you were playing in a tournament, I definitely recommend using the rules version of moving. So again, you'd move the leader 5 inches, then move all the other ones their characteristic, making sure they're still within command range, That way you can kind of space them out a little bit more too. You can have a scenario like this where you have your Praetorian Guard behind your Mori and you want to move them through. And you can either take 1 or 2 march actions to get them through. So let's do 1. And let's just say they came through right here. He's marching through this way. This guy's coming through here. He moves here, and then he moves right here because he's still within 5 inches of my leader. And that would be like the first movement. And if they could do a second movement to get around, get through. He moves up 5 inches, 5 inches, 5 inches, and then the last one 5 inches. And that would be a second movement through. Now let's look at a scenario with a larger regiment where you have both a leader and actually a standard bearer. In this case, what you could do is move your leader first, then move your standard bearer, and then move everyone else within 5 inches of them. Making sure that you keep them close here. Let's move this guy. He's gonna cross over to be right here. He's gonna come in and be right here. He's gonna come out here like this, and this guy comes in like that. As long as they're within range of the standard bearer or the leader, and these two have to be within the command range of each other, which would be 5 inches. You're all good. Okay, so one last restriction to the movement. Now let's just say that this one guy was engaged with some Steel Legion, right? At this point, they can't march, so they can't march. They would have to actually do a clash action and move closer and start attacking the Steel Legion. So this is a scenario where you could not march. If the Steel Legion were here, you couldn't do a march and move, like say this guy, that would be engagement. You couldn't do that. You would actually have to take a charge action, not a march.
Some of the things I had a really hard time with at the beginning of the game was trying to maneuver around obstacles. Would see my opponent have some kind of a volley regiment, and I'd be afraid of them, and so I'd maneuver my regiment behind a building or like this a hill or something of that sort. And when I did that, I realized now they can't really maneuver out of that position because they can't go through it, like a building in this case. Hills, sometimes they can go over them, but sometimes there's impassable like kind of hills and just terrain features. And if you get too close to them, you end up having to either like crab walk sideways or kind of like do a whole reform in order to start moving a completely different direction to go and face your opponent. That was one of the things I really struggled with, was to figure out how to stay in cover but also not be restricted by that cover by like getting too close to it. Some advice for wielding is, pick that one corner and make sure not to squeeze your stands too tightly, because if you start squeezing the stands too tightly, they'll start popping out. So just get some light pressure on there, and then just rotate everything nicely. If you have multiple files going, just move your front one first and rotate that one, and then kind of move everything else behind it. One of the caveats of doing wields too is make sure that your back end, if you have a really big unit, like let's say they're 3 stands or even 4 stands deep, doing a wield, they have to be able to fit in that area that you're wielding too. So if you're trying to get around some terrain and you wield it a little too far, and that back end doesn't now fit into the area where the impassable terrain is, then they wouldn't be able to wield that far. You'd have to stop them and then kind of shimmy on through. Sorry, I had to go outside and help Smud look at the power lines and the different stuff in the yard. So I was out handling that for a couple of minutes, and my glasses got really dark and they don't transition very quickly back. So back to marching. Now when it comes to First Blood and marching, some advice I have, the second method I showed in the examples for First Blood, that's the way I like to kind of shortcut, making it really easy to move a regiment, especially a larger regiment, and get the game flowing a little bit faster. Especially in a casual environment where you're, learning rules or just play testing a little army or just, having a bit of fun. But obviously, if you're going to be playing in a tournament, you want to play with the official of moving each model its individual move characteristic. One last thing too, if you're trying to march through a friendly regiment and you don't have room to do the big swinging movement that I showed because either terrain or other regiments in the way, you can just pick up that stand and pick it up, move it over the regiment, and place it back where the end of its movement would be. Thank you for joining me for this episode about the march action. Next episode, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite actions, the charge.